Hi there, and welcome to Off the Data Provided, an interpersonal communication podcast. I'm, of course, your host, Dr. Marcus C. Shepard. On today's episode, I wanted to talk to you all about a book called We Should Get Together, The Secret to Cultivating Better Friendships. It's a book by Kat Vellos that was originally released back in 2019. It's a book I actually read way back in 2022, but with a lot of conversations I've been having recently, some social media chatter that I've also viewed, I thought it would be a great book to revisit, talk about some of the broad strokes, and highly recommend that if you are having some issues building, fostering, and or maintaining friendships, especially in adulthood, that this might be a really great resource for you to visit. Or maybe revisit if it's something that has come across your eyes or timeline before. So we're going to spend the episode kind of talking broadly about this book. And other than that, we're not going to have an Ask Dr. Shepard this week because Dr. Shepard's in the midst of final season, so a lot is going on. But if you do want to submit an Ask Dr. Shepard, feel free to email me at offthedataprovided@gmail.com. That is, once again, offthedataprovided@gmail.com. So, as I said, We Should Get Together, The Secret to Cultivating Better Friendships is a book that is designed to really help us figure out how to get through this loneliness epidemic that we are fighting. So we know that according to the former Surgeon General Vivek H. Murphy, loneliness puts as much stress on our body as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. So clearly, people, as we have discussed throughout the entirety of this podcast, are feeling a lot lonelier, a lot more isolated. And as we've talked about on earlier podcasts, a lot of that has to do with our reliance and overdependence on our smartphones, these apps, social media, dating apps, where we are feeling more so, quote unquote, alone together. As we know, Sherry Tuckle wrote her book, Alone Together, Why We Expect More from Technology and Less from Each Other. This groundbreaking book, I believe from the early 2000s, still rings true today. And with that in mind, we know also that making friends as an adult is work. And the average American, according to We Should Get Together, hasn't made one new friend in the last 5 years. As someone who has a plethora of friends and who does not struggle in this arena, this book for me was enlightening in a sense to view it from a different angle. As I've shared before on this podcast, because of how my life is set up, I have a non-traditional job, as we've talked about before. I kind of work traditional 9 to 5-ish hours 3 days a week, and the rest of the days I kind of have to do what I need to do for my life and to foster, allows me a lot of time to foster relationships, to maintain existing ones, and to branch out and build new ones. But as we know with adulthood, time is a currency that not many of us have, and that is why spending time building friendships is maybe not so high on people's priority. It's not high up on their list. We spend more time building our lists of followers and contacting them and engaging with those people on social media than we do in real offline true friendships. And as I've shared before, I have used the online space and medium to foster friendships. I moved to the city of Philadelphia almost 10 years ago, and I use social media. I use different apps to actually create and build friends. So there is a usefulness on these platforms, but it's going to be very important that you take time to move those relationships offline. And I'm reminded of a tweet that my friend Humphrey tweeted a few days ago where he was sharing that people are lonely in every sense of the word. So I understand why these conversations constantly come up. Also, it gets worse as folks age, especially if there's aspirations to be married, have a family. I get it. And he tweeted that, and I responded, of course, saying, and yet, what actionable items are they doing to foster and maintain community? While I understand the conversations, there has to be a next step of doing something to change one's own interpersonal relationship dynamics. And I feel as if this book is a really great space and place to help people find those tools, figure out those spaces where they can go and actually create that action plan. So we know that people would love to have a better friendship, but time, work and money, emotional availability, location, love, family, and the internet are all excuses or reasons why they can't make that change. And what is going to be important is that we can't talk about how to address the change without talking about things that contribute to it. So we can't talk about how we're going to fix the friendship problem without acknowledging and examining those contributing factors. So, of course, the common factors that this book highlights are hypermobility, busyness, relationships/family, and the shrinking capacity for intimacy in the digital era. Of course, we know, as we have talked before on this podcast, that it takes about 200 hours to turn a stranger or acquaintance into a close friend. So if you are super busy, you're always on the go, your focus is more so on your family or finding those committed romantic relationships, and then, of course, our shrinking capacity for intimacy in the digital era, you're just not going to have those 200 hours to make that friendship. So, this book offers a variety of aspects to figure out how you can form a close friendship in as little as 2 weeks. Of course, that's going to take a lot of time and preparation. I'm not going to tell you what she says regarding that, because that is basically the money shot, I guess, in her book. So I do encourage you to maybe go to the library and rent it or buy it or get the audiobook if there is one and hear what she has to say about that. But I do think it's important to explore how we got here and offer, of course, some tips and tricks, some that she says in the book, some that I practice, some that I also preach to my students as well. So we know, of course, that when it comes to the ingredients at the core of the creation and continuation of a quality friendship, we have the seeds of connection. And so those are going to be proximity, frequency, and comparability, as well as commitment. So proximity, of course, just to make sure we all have the same baseline definitions, is the geographical and physical closeness that makes it easier to cross paths and share space. So, of course, if you live closer to people, it's going to be a lot easier for you to, one, meet them, to start that friendship, but also to maintain that friendship. Then we know that frequency is the combination of timing and repetition that allows you to foster fondness and familiarity. So the more that you interact and see somebody and engage with them, the closer you'll get with them. Comparability is capable of existing together in harmony. So is there friction? Is there not? And then, of course, commitment. It's not a feeling, it's an action. It's showing up. Your word is bond. If you say you're going to do something, you do it. You don't flake. I know that we have talked about before, it's very easy for people to flake. Even another Twitter conversation I saw that Humphrey was engaging with. I so love how Humphrey has become kind of a space for these relationship conversations. I love peeking in, see what he's saying or see what he is bringing about. But essentially, a lot of people, they flake because, oh, well, you didn't confirm with me the day of if we had plans. Well, if we made the plans, is our word not bond and we're going to show up? Right? I think people can take it either way. And I think when I was seeing conversations about that, especially on my Twitter feed, it was fascinating to see both sides of the story. I am someone, when it comes to plans, I will check in with someone maybe about 24 hours before just to make sure we're still on. And after that commitment, I believe that it's going to happen. If something is going to change on my end or the other party's end, then I am looking for them to be responsible enough to highlight that and let me know. We also know that when it comes to these seeds of connection, that sometimes when we think about the friends that we have fostered, because of maybe a lack of proximity or frequency, particularly, that we have those existing friendships that are fading away due to maybe the frequency deficit. So we know that strong friendships often rely on routine to leave the fabric of your life together. So this becomes more important, of course, as we age. So if we are going to suffer a frequency deficit because maybe we don't live as closely to one another, what is the routine that we build into the fabric of our lives to keep these people around with us? So, as I have shared before with existing friends that I'm still very close to, I think about Kiara, who just recently had a birthday. Shout out to Dr. Singleton. We talk probably once or twice a week now. That's down, of course, from our daily conversations, literally when we both were bright-eyed and bushy-tailed back in 2011 in our PhD programs. I swear we probably didn't go more than 48 hours without talking to each other on the phone for basically like 5 years straight. Didn't matter what was going on. And so, of course, that's not sustainable as our lives change, but we still make time for each other and there's a frequency. She cold calls me, I'll cold call her. Sometimes she clicks me to voicemail. Sometimes I click her to voicemail. Sometimes I can only talk for a brief moment. Sometimes she can only talk for a brief moment. But we have built in that routine. Same with my friend Darius. We talk several times a week on the phone, just randomly. He'll cold call me. I'll cold call him. I send him a lot of texts. He's not great on text. So usually when we talk on the phone, I'll be like, oh, go to your text, see what I sent you. And so that has become a routine for us. My other close friends, right? Jaime, Primo, my cousin, we literally just had a 3-hour conversation this past week. But before that, we hadn't talked on the phone since 2025. But we have a routine where we kind of check in a bit via text here or there. And then when timing permits, because of proximity, especially the geographic distance, he lives in Los Angeles, I'm in Philadelphia, the 3-hour time difference can be difficult to maneuver. But we still have a frequency. It's not on the phone frequency, but we did build our original friendship as we talked about those 200 hours when I was in LA and we started our friendship. We probably saw each other 3 to 4 times a week for 3 to 4 years, right? That's a lot of FaceTime, a lot of building of the foundations. And so we know that friends, of course, are more likely to survive if the friend involved shares the responsibility of the friendship's maintenance equitably. And so, as we have talked about before, sometimes what happens with friendships is someone feels as if they're doing more of the lion's share of the work. And if they pull away, if the other person doesn't react and fight for it or pull them back in, then the relationship kind of falls apart. So I know I had a close friendship here in Philadelphia, and that friend got into a committed romantic relationship. And of course, as we've discussed before on this podcast, it makes sense that a friend won't have as much time for you. So this is a friend that I probably saw twice a week. And so, of course, I wouldn't assume we would see each other twice a week, maybe not even once a week. But we went from seeing each other with that frequency to seeing each other once every other month, to texts slowly trickling in, responses trickling in from his side, because he was so enamored and focused on his committed romantic relationship. Of course, when that relationship ended, he was available and wanted to hang out again. And of course, that we never really got back on the same footing because, as I make it very clear to people who are newer friends or who I'm building friendships with, I don't tolerate being discarded to the side because you have a man, you have a woman, you have a partner. I am very much aware and not delusional that you'll have less time for me, but it doesn't mean that our time goes from 100 to 0. And so I think we need to be open and honest about that with people, and I'm very honest about that from jump. I think I'm a very great friend. I don't have a lot of friend turnover. I haven't struggled with making friends, period. Some of that comes from my background and upbringing. I used to move a lot as a child. So as a child, you move somewhere new, you're the new kid. You kind of have to rely on someone opening up and allowing you into their circle or being friendly, and then you kind of snowball from there. But of course, as we're talking about more so adult friendships right now and focus on how do you build those. And that is really hard for a lot of people. So we know that commitment also exists through 5 core behaviors. It's openness, it's caring, it's trust, it's dedication, it's reciprocity. And that comes really in to focus with adult friendships. Are you being open? Are you being caring? Are you trustworthy? Are you dedicated? If you say you're going to do something, you're going to do it. Do you reciprocate what happens? So I know some of the friendships I have here in Philadelphia, for instance, there's one that I would say we're not necessarily acquaintances, but I wouldn't label them necessarily a friend. I think we're sociable beings. And a lot of that stems from the fact that this individual just isn't open. I would ask this individual kind of basic questions that you would ask a friend, and I would get kind of monotonous or kind of one-worded answers or not very detailed answers. And I could ask follow-up questions, and I did at the beginning of our blossoming interpersonal social relationship, right? As I said, I wouldn't necessarily label it a friendship, but it became clear that this person wasn't interested in opening up about things. And so for me, especially at this state and age, I'm not interested in fostering relationships with someone that I have to pull teeth with, that I have to ask you a million and one questions. I have to be Barbara Walters or Oprah Winfrey. I feel like if I asked you how your date was, you went on a date with someone, you just don't say it went well and that's it. If we're friends, you could open up. Oh, what did you do? You tell me what you ate. What were your impressions? Did you like them? Do you want to go on another date? And so from that experience, I remember talking with Kiara. I was like, I don't know about this. And Kiara was like, oh, it takes time for friendships to blossom. And I said, no, I agree, right? Not everybody is an open book or connects instantly. And I even know that some of my closest friends, right, they took time to blossom, right? Darius is someone that I met literally on Twitter. We watched Queen of the South, our show, and our friendship snowballed from there, right? We followed each other. I remember he did a really cool video of singing Beyonce over a Lion King beat. And I was like, who is this person? This is cool. He has a good ear. He has a good tone. And we both were tweeting Queen of the South back when you would hashtag things and you would follow those hashtags. And so we followed each other and we started talking. I came to find out he lived in DC. I had recently moved to Philly and we made plans to hang out and it just snowballed from there. And now he's the person I probably talk to almost the most in my life. So that relationship snowballed where my relationship with Kiera was almost instant, right? Just instant word vomit. Same with Jaime. I remember literally we met at the Yard House by LA Live. Shout out to that location. I remember leaving our hangout and I called Kiera, right? Again, these people have been in my life for decades almost at this point. And I was like, I think I just met someone who's going to be in my life for the rest of my life, like you. And we talked about it, and he has been, and he's been around, and so on and so forth. Even Janine, Dr. Anderson, we kind of had an instant connection. So yes, sometimes things build, but when it's clear that a commitment, such as maybe someone not being as open or caring or trustworthy or dedicated or reciprocity, that's going to become an issue. And it's definitely a yellow flag. And depending on where you are in your friendship journey, might be something to call to their attention if you do want to foster a closer relationship with them, or if you're not necessarily in the market, that might be an off-ramp for you. So as I've shared before, right, I am fortunate enough to be bountiful in my interpersonal relationships. So for me, it was kind of like, okay, cool. I'm not going to push. I am just going to allow this person their privacy because people deserve privacy. But this also is somebody I know I'm not going to grow so close to because they are reserved. And for me, if you're a friend, I like to kind of openly talk about my life. I don't like to kind of masquerade or hide things. Darius and I always get a giggle with Darius because he'll be talking about something and he'll be like, oh, wait, I forgot who I'm talking to. I can just say it how I want to say it. You're not going to judge me or make it. I was like, of course not, right? We've known each other for almost a decade at this point. Like, we're having kitchen table talk anytime we're together, even sometimes if it's in public. We just don't care. So we know, of course, back to that commitment, back to that reciprocity, we know that when only one person in a relationship is giving dedicated attention, encouragement, and nurturing the other, that's not really a friendship. It's either therapy or a life coach client relationship, and it's usually accompanied by a hefty fee. So I remember, and we've talked about this before, I went super viral, probably the most viral I've gone, by sharing a text message with somebody. And they were essentially asking me to give them some kind words or words of encouragement because they had been going through something difficult. And before they had asked that, above was me asking how they were doing. And that was from 3 weeks before, which they had totally ignored and had not engaged with me since. And my response was essentially saying, hey, I'm sorry to hear that you're going through a rough time, but why don't you connect with those people that you were engaging with these last 3 weeks while you basically were ignoring me? And the person, of course, said, oh, you're right, like, essentially wanting me to be the quote unquote fat friend, as we have discussed before. And the fat friend stereotype or archetype, as just a brief refresher, is usually that type of thing where a relationship is one-sided. One person is dedicating the attention, encouragement, and nurturing of the other person while the other person is not giving anything or much in return. And so I was unwilling and unable to fulfill that role. It is a role, right? I've been transparent on this podcast and just in life in general that I had fulfilled for people before. When my self-esteem was lower, when my internalized anti-fatness was rather high, I was just happy to be in the room or happy that someone cared to ask me a question or cared to be in my presence. And so I was willing to provide that labor, but Dr. Shepard, Marcus, whatever, is unwilling and unable to do that now in this day and age. So we know that unfortunately is where a lot of these adult friendships fall through the cracks, right? You meet somebody, things start going well, and then life happens. As we've talked about before, friendships are work. They are difficult. But what also happens is when things hit the fan, friends are oftentimes the first thing on our plate that we toss to the side to focus on whatever. It's not family, it's not our romantic relationships, it's not our jobs that get pushed to the side. It is our friends that get pushed to the side. And I think we as a society have normalized that. And because we have, when that happens, especially in this day and age, these friendships, especially if they aren't long-term friendships, they fracture. They just don't go anywhere. I know, for instance, I had a friend here in Philadelphia. We were fostering a friendship, and he shared with me that he needed a mental health break. He was kind of going off of social media. He wasn't going to be on his phone. He didn't want to be bothered, and he was going to do it for 6 months, and he would pop back up when things were fine. I said, okay, I respect your journey. And so he popped back up and was like, hey, I'm back. How about we hang out on this day? And I said, oh, well, I'm busy that day. Clearly I have a life. It just didn't stop to wait for you. I said, but what about another day? Never got a response back for them. But because there had been such a prolonged gap in our interpersonal relationship and we hadn't been friends for that long before that gap, I didn't feel the need or honestly, to be transparent, the desire to put in even more effort. So the ball was in his court, right? It was an inadequate follow through. And so we know that inadequate follow through is one of the biggest friendship related frustrations that people deal with. Sometimes it seems like we're in a famine of follow through, as the book We Should Get Together highlights. So it's going to be important that when we look at the seeds of connection, as we said before, the proximity, frequency, comparability, and commitment, how are we making sure we are creating an environment for these seeds to grow? So clearly proximity, right? The geographic and physical closeness that makes it easier to cross paths and share space. It's going to be easier to foster friendships with people who live close to you. It's going to be harder for those that don't live as close. It's going to take more work. It's going to take more resources, right? Money. It's going to take you traveling or them traveling or being on the phone. It's not just an easy, oh, what are you doing tonight? Let's hang out. It's going to take planning. It's going to take effort. So if you're looking to first build friendships in your local area, I think as an adult, it's important to put yourself out there. So the local library is a great place to meet new people. They host a lot of free events where you can potentially meet like-minded people, or even the gym. You can go there, you can take classes at certain gyms, you can run in or meet people. I know that I go to the gym around the same time and I see similar people there. And so some of those people have chatted me up at times. And if I was looking for adult friendships, if I was hungry for that, which I'm fortunately not at this state, I would asked to meet outside of that social role. As we've talked about before, your initial contact is usually through a social role, and then you have to make a request to exist outside of that. So if I meet you at the library event, or I meet you at the gym, or we're always running to each other at coffee and at the coffee shop and have a brief conversation, well, someone needs to take that step, take that leap, and ask, hey, do you want to hang out outside of this? Or hey, maybe at the gym, do you want to grab a smoothie afterwards real quick? You have to exist outside of that social role to even see if there is comparability. Can you exist in harmony together? Is there a lot of crossover? Do you guys like similar things? This is going to be a really important step, and sometimes it's the hardest step for people to make because we're, of course, very afraid of rejection. What if the person says no? What if the person blows you off? What if they flake? But if you truly are feeling lonely, you have to keep putting yourself out there until those no's or the flakiness turns into yeses. And even with those no's, and it can be hard. I know when I first moved here to Philadelphia, it was hard to make friends at first. I was putting myself out there. I'm not a go to the club type of person. So I had to find other avenues and areas. So I use a lot of these quote unquote dating apps. But what I did on the dating apps was said, I'm not looking for dating, right? I'm here. I recently moved here. I'm looking for friends. And I met some great friends, people I'm actually still friends with almost a decade later who I still hang out with. Nothing ever was romantic. I made my intentions very clear from jump on my profiles. I was looking for friends and we fostered friendships. But with some of those friendships, right, a few of them have maybe gone south, as we would say, it's important to scan over the seeds of connection to hone in on exactly why this friendship maybe went south. So was there a commitment issue? Was there a frequency issue? Was there a proximity issue? Was it a comparability issue? Was there a harmony issue? What was it? I think when friendships end, we oftentimes just scoot it to the side and recognize that we have friends for a reason, a season, and a lifetime, which means sometimes just for a moment in your life, you're friends with people. So I think about people I went to high school with. I didn't have any fallings out with those people, but we're no longer in that space or place. We don't have that proximity. We clearly have not maintained a frequency. There's really no commitment from any of our ends. And who knows about the compatibility? But for that season of high school, we were friends, or even college friends. I'm not really that close to most people I went to college with. Right after college, I went straight to my PhD program. But I am friends with a few people from college, but those were people who made a commitment. Those are people who checked in with me. The frequency, of course, wasn't high on my end, nor was necessarily high on their end while I was in the midst of my PhD program. But there were check-ins along the way that then made it possible for us to really have a relationship once I was done with my PhD program. And I think about my good friend Ronette, for instance, from college, right? We're still friends. We send each other 101 things every day in the DMs on Instagram, on Twitter. We text here and there. Anytime I'm in New York and I have a free moment, we see each other. Anytime she's thinking about coming to Philly, she automatically lets me know, even if she's not going to have time to see me. And so we have still built in a commitment to one another, even though, sure, maybe our proximity is somewhat close. New York to Philly isn't that bad, especially on an Amtrak if it's not expensive. And of course, our frequency isn't as scheduled, but I do see Ronette probably twice a year since I've moved to Philly, if not more. So, but it still is important, as we said, to figure out where things went left and if it's someone you care about, to maybe talk about it. Let's talk about this seed of connection that maybe I haven't done a great job with, or you haven't done a great job with, or maybe both of us haven't done a great job with. For me, I'm someone that always views a situation with accountability that nobody's 100% at fault. You might be 99.98%, but I have a 0.02% or something involved in. That's how I view it. And I also think when you view it that way, it allows you to have a more beneficial conversation to figure out where you and your friends maybe went left. And so when it comes to you wanting to make friends, the emotional investment and effort hardly seem worth it if your friend is not as invested, as I shared before with that one friend that it was clear he wasn't opening up about things. So I kind of pulled back. And so our relationship, I would say these days, I wouldn't label it fully superficial, but we don't necessarily talk about things that matter in the grand scheme of life. This is a friend that if I moved away, if we want to label him a friend, or he moved away, that I think just the distance, right? That proximity, we wouldn't be friends anymore. We would transition very much into amiens. And as we talked about before, amiens aren't former friends. They aren't acquaintances. They're people you have a shared history with. They're just people you lost touch with but due to social media and the digital world that we exist in, we keep tabs on them. So I'll still follow them, or I'll like their pictures, or I might wish them happy birthday. But outside of that, I'm not invested in the daily rigmarole of their lives. As we've talked about before, investment, trust, commitment, these things you're not really doing. How am I investing in someone if I'm just passively viewing their lives on their Instagram stories? You're not. But because of social media, as we've talked about before, these digital devices give us the illusion of companionship without the demands of friendship. And that's where that amienship comes in, right? I feel connected to you because I'm seeing the highlight reel of your life. I know kind of what's going on with you, but I'm ultimately not investing in you. I'm not calling you up. You're not calling me up. We're not making concrete plans to hang out. We are voyeurs in one another's lives. But we didn't have a falling out, right? So we're not former friends. We're not acquaintances because at one time we were friends. But just due to how life exists and happens, I oftentimes think when my parents were around my age, due to the lack of social media, right? There weren't even, there were computers, the internet was coming on board. But essentially you had your landline, maybe you had a cell phone if you were fancy, and you had an address. And when you moved, you would give people your new address. You would give them your new phone number. You would keep their phone numbers, right? I remember we literally had a Rolodex by our phone when I was growing up, right? Dr. Shepard's a little old, I guess. They're long in the tooth. And that is how you would maintain contact with people. And if you moved and you didn't give them your new information, you lost touch. It wasn't that you had a falling out. It just was how life goes. So we know that clearly we need to figure out how we foster these closer relationships. So acquaintances, right? 90% of the time is spent outside of our house. Friends, 80% outside the house. Close friends, 70% maybe inside the house. This is where you want to get to. So clearly you meet someone, you do things outside of your house. Then maybe you slowly start to form friendship. You invite them over every now and then. And then when you're a close friend, you kind of hang out mostly inside the house. My mom just had a bunch of her college besties visiting, and the majority of the time they just spent together in the house talking, eating, hanging out, because that's what close friendship is. And I know when my friends visit me, in addition to being COVID conscious, right, so I don't really go out like that, but we literally just spend most of our time in my living room, in my kitchen. If the weather's nice, we're sitting out on the rooftop and we're just catching up. We're just having conversations. It's not necessarily about doing things. It's just about being in one's presence. But clearly you don't get there overnight. You get there by making time for people. We know that one of the busiest complaints that comes up when people talk about friendship, especially in adulthood, is that everyone is so busy all the time. So if busyness is a state of having a life choked off by endlessly full calendar, then what is the opposite of it? It's spaciousness. So how can we find space? Busyness is a choice. It's a mindset. It's an attitude that many of us are addicted to identifying with. And it's a way of thinking that we can set aside. So I know when I was in Puerto Rico for my spring break, something that I always love doing is disconnecting. So I usually go for a swim every day for an hour. And when I'm swimming, I'm not tethered to my phone. I am still. I am just me in the water. And usually because the temperatures are quote unquote a little too chilly for the natives of Puerto Rico, I'm at the pool by myself. There's nobody there. It's just me in the pool. And yes, when I'm in Philadelphia, I have a rather busy lifestyle, right? I like to go to the gym a few times a week, at the supermarket probably 3 to 4 times a week. I'm an AMC A-lister. I'm at the movies at least once a week. Of course, I have to work. But it's important to put those busyness things aside to build friendships. So I am famous for being on the phone for a day. Call somebody and we'll be on the phone for a few hours. In the midst of that, another friend will call me and I'll tell them I'll call them back. Then I call them and then it snowballs and I call another friend and another friend. I have set aside times to just not be busy. It's a choice to be busy. But we know that when, for instance, you want to start a new romantic relationship, you make time for that person. So why is it not that we make time for close friends, to build close friends? And according to we should get together, starting a new relationship, a romantic relationship, typically leads to the loss of 2 close friends because of the huge investment in time that a new romance requires. So that, of course, underscores the example I was telling you about earlier, where I lost one of my close friends here in Philly who I used to see twice a week. We used to go to the movies. We used to do a whole lot of things there. We used to go to the gym together. We used to go and buy shoes. We were sneakerheads together. But we lost that connection because we unfortunately weren't putting in the time. And by we, more so him. He was investing a lot of time into building that new romantic relationship. And I, unfortunately, was on the chopping block. So friends, right, if we want them to be a priority, we have to make them a priority. If they're just placeholders for a baby, for marriage, for grown-up job, for a whatever you want to in place there, family, then they're not going to last. And unfortunately, as I've shared before, we as a society as a whole have kind of placed friends at a second tier. So oftentimes it's family and romantic relationships are tier 1, and maybe some very important coworkers because you want to do well at your work, you want to get promotion, you want to do all that. And then our friends are second tier. But if you're complaining about being lonely, as so many people are, then you need to remove those friends from that second tier and move them to your first tier. The norm, of course, of interacting online has kind of usurped budding in real life friendships. So it's easier for me to respond to your tweet or your DM than maybe it is to talk to you on the phone or to text or to make concrete plans to grab food or to go for a walk, go to the movies. So I know, as I've shared, right, I'm an AMC A-lister. I'm at the movies all the time. And so what I do for my group of friends here in Philadelphia is when I'm going to a movie, I'll send a text if it's a movie that I think people are interested in and a time that I think people are free. Now, more recently, I've been guilty of going to movies kind of during the daytime where I know people are working, just because I like to avoid crowds. So those invites don't necessarily come, or maybe every once in a while if I think people are free or maybe they're on vacation, I'll send it. But I'm mindful of inviting people out, right? Making sure there's places. Or my most recent hosting event was the Oscars were here. So I had people over and I cooked. And so we have to put aside that time and not just make these people feel as if they are placeholders. And of course, social media platforms want us to share what we've been up to, but it's kind of only on that surface level. Real friendship, though, isn't about skimming. So I think about being on the phone with my friends. It's never a short call because it's not a skim. It's not a surface level. It is maybe, oh my God, did you see this thing on Twitter? And then it evolves into something else and evolves into something else and evolves into retelling a story that we've told 20 times and laughing about that and saying, oh, did you see this? Right? It becomes something, even if it starts off as something that was surface level. But on social media, you rarely get past the surface level. Sure, if you move it to the DMs, maybe you can get a little deeper, but that oftentimes doesn't happen. So we want to make sure that we are figuring out how to bypass this illusion of companionship without the demands of friendship. And unfortunately, these mediated digital devices are something we all need to figure out our relationship to. So even when we hang out with people, as we've discussed before on this podcast, how do we make sure that these digital devices don't disrupt or interrupt what we're doing? And I know I've been guilty of it, as I've shared on this podcast, and I feel like the majority of you have probably been guilty of it as well, where you're on your phone while you're with your friend, or, oh, well, I just need to have it on me just in case someone has an emergency or I need to be there for them. So you're there for someone who's in your phone, but not necessarily there and present for the person who's across from you on the couch or sitting with you at dinner. And so how can we combat this? I know back when I was growing up, right, when we all first started having cell phones, it was no cell phones at the dinner table. Now, when I eat with my parents, sometimes they're guilty, or maybe I'm guilty of having our phones out or checking something, right? We've kind of moved as a society, I would argue devolved, but maybe some would say evolved, but we've moved in a direction of society where we are really tethered to these devices. And I think it's important to move back to a situation where we're not. So I know kind of in the 2010s, people used to do where everyone puts their phone in the middle of the table and whoever goes for their phone first has to pay for the meal or has to do something. And while people would maybe think that's crazy in 2026, I think figuring out some type of way to be more present is really a great way to build a friendship. So the author argues, right, that her hypothesis was that if two people who have decent chemistry commit to 10 consecutive days of quality time, that they'll be able to form the kind of closeness that typically takes months to build. And so when I look back at my burgeoning friendships that I had when I first moved to Philly, I was doing this without realizing it. So when I first kind of connected with people online and found out they were in Philly or found out they lived close by, I made it a point to try and see them as frequently as possible during the early days because that really sets the foundation. But unfortunately, what happens, as we've talked about for the last 40 minutes or so, is that we get busy and we don't make that time. We don't make that effort. We don't have that scheduled time. So it's important to come back and figure out what's a scheduled thing we can do. So even once those friendships were kind of off the ground, especially early on here in Philadelphia, I would have weekly TV nights where we would watch a reality TV show, or we had a show that we would watch in common, or a Netflix thing. And so it was kind of a built-in thing we would do together. Or I'm famous for Pizza Friday nights, and so I would invite some people for pizza every Friday. So how do we build in that forms of closeness? And as we've talked about, it's that frequency. And so friends are the people who voluntarily love and care about you, even when they're not obligated to by blood or familial expectation, and vice versa. So we know that we offer that care and love back to them. And that's clearly something that is missing and something that people are desiring. And this book, as I said, is a really great resource. The last part of the book, which I'm clearly not going to go into, as I said, because that's really the meat and potatoes, maybe the reason why you buy the book, is she gives you small talk questions because a lot of people struggle with talking to people. So she literally gives you conversation starters. Literally on reflections, on imagination, on identity. She has other questions that are on relationships. She has questions on family. She has questions, I'm literally scrolling through it right now, on your learning style, on your views on society, on politics, on music, all of these really great questions. Has to be maybe 200 questions that she has in this. She also talks about maybe forming a book club. I know I tried to do that with some people, but competing demands happen. So it is what it is. She also has the Friendship Incubator, which I think is a really fascinating thing to look into, and essentially looks at from 0 to 60 in 2 weeks. So how you can build that very close friendship. I think this book, as I said before, is a really great resource if you're struggling to foster friendships, especially in adulthood. Hopefully our conversation today underscored some things that you can do. Of course, first and foremost is looking at those seeds of connection. So thinking about proximity, frequency, comparability, and commitment, figuring out what went right and what went wrong with former friends so you can maybe avoid those traps, or when those red or yellow flags are identified, that you can address them head on. As we talked about, what's really going to be important is for you to figure out your engagement with these digital devices and how those have made us alone together. You also need to move out of that busyness mindset and create space and place for these seeds to grow and for your friendships to foster. We talked about, of course, amienships, and we want to hopefully avoid creating more of those amienships. Or if you have figured out that someone has become an amienship and you don't want them to be an amien anymore, then you need to figure out an active way to invest in that friendship, invest in their lives, and hopefully for them to invest in your life. If you feel as if you are the one who is giving more into the friendship, as we highlighted, as I have underscored, I have been that person. It's going to be important for you to bring that up to the person, to give them the opportunity to rise to the occasion. And if they decide not to, then you need to figure out if you're willing to exist in that unequal friendship. I remember one of those unequal friendships I had, Janine highlighted that to me quickly, almost instantly, when I talked to her about this new friend. She was like, I can already tell that this friendship is going to be a friendship where you're going to have to do the majority of the work. This person is just not mentally able to due to their situation. I was like, oh, I'm totally fine with that. Like, I love the connection we have. We have great conversations. Like, we're very intentional. And she said, yeah, I get that. She said, but there's going to come a time where you get really tired of always being the one to reach out, always being the one to make the plans. And eventually it happened. And I think anybody eventually gets tired of always putting in the lion's share of the effort in any interpersonal relationship, but especially friendships. And so with those friendships, those oftentimes fall by the wayside. So this book, as I said, is a great resource that kind of examines and excavates the secret to cultivating better and more long-term friendships, and is definitely a book I would highly recommend if you are struggling to make those relationships. So again, it's called We Should Get Together, The Secret to Cultivating Better Friendships. It's by Kat Vellos, and that is where we will wrap it up for today. Thank you all for listening, and I will catch you on the next one. Goodbye.